Marcus Hawthorne had always been fascinated by the wild, the untamed parts of the world. As a wealthy businessman, he had everything he could ever want: money, power, and success. But it wasn't enough. He had a hunger for adventure, for experiences beyond the ordinary, the kind of stories that no one else had the courage to seek. One day, while attending an exclusive party in London, Marcus overheard a conversation between two guests about an ancient and mysterious tribe deep within the Amazon rainforest. They spoke in whispers, as though the very name of the tribe held power. They described a woman from the tribe, one who was said to possess incredible strength, beauty, and wisdom, a woman who was more than human, whose presence commanded respect and awe. Her name was Yara. She had grown up in the wild heart of the Amazon, where she was trained as a warrior, a protector of the land. The tribe had raised her to be fierce, fearless, and untouchable. The stories fascinated Marcus. He was no stranger to buying rare and exotic items, but this was something different. He wasn't interested in a simple artifact or animal. He wanted the woman herself. He wanted to own her. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about her. His mind raced with thoughts of how much he could learn from her, how much power she could bring to his life. He imagined how he could sell her story to the world, how her exotic beauty would increase his reputation, turning him into an even more powerful figure in society. But there was one problem. How could he possibly reach her, let alone convince the tribe to part with her? A few weeks later, Marcus had tracked down an old explorer who had spent years in the Amazon. The man was rough, weathered by time, and smelled of the jungle, but he knew the region like the back of his hand. After a hefty payment and a few drinks, the explorer agreed to help Marcus. He spoke of the remote tribe that had kept to themselves for centuries, but their customs were changing, their lands were becoming endangered, and outsiders were beginning to encroach on their world. "There's a price to be paid for every bargain," the explorer warned. "But if you're determined, I'll help you find her. Just be prepared for what's to come." Marcus listened closely, every word stoking the fire of his ambition. The explorer told him that Yara was no ordinary woman. She was not like the other women of the tribe. She was chosen for something much greater, something that Marcus would never fully understand. But that didn't matter to him. All he saw was an opportunity, and he was willing to pay whatever it took. A few months later, Marcus found himself on a plane heading to the Amazon, accompanied by the explorer and a small team of hired guides. The thick humidity of the rainforest greeted him as soon as he stepped off the plane, the air heavy with the scent of earth and wet leaves. The jungle was alive, teeming with noise, the calls of animals, the rustle of the trees, the buzzing of insects. It was a world that felt completely foreign to him, a place of beauty and danger, where the rules of civilization no longer applied. The journey to the tribe's village was long and exhausting. They trekked through dense underbrush, crossed fast-moving rivers, and fought off swarms of mosquitoes. But nothing could stop Marcus's excitement. He was closing in on his prize, and nothing would stand in his way. After days of travel, they finally arrived at the tribe's hidden village, located deep in the heart of the jungle. The village was small, but it was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. The people lived in harmony with nature, their homes made from wood and thatch, their lives simple and untouched by the outside world. The tribe's people greeted them with cautious curiosity, their eyes filled with both wariness and awe. They had never seen outsiders before, let alone a rich, well-dressed man like Marcus. Marcus was escorted to the leader of the tribe, an older man with a long white beard and sharp eyes. He looked at Marcus with a mixture of respect and suspicion. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension. "I come in peace," Marcus said, offering the leader a hand, his voice calm but confident. "I seek to buy one of your people." The leader raised an eyebrow. "Buy? You wish to buy a human?" Marcus nodded. "I am willing to pay whatever it takes. I have heard of Yara. I wish to take her back to my land." The leader studied him for a long moment. She is not an object to be bought or sold. She is a protector of the jungle. She cannot be taken. But Marcus wasn't about to back down. I understand her value, he said. She could be a symbol, a way to connect our worlds. Think of what it could mean for your tribe, for your people. You could have wealth, safety, power. I am willing to offer you anything. After what seemed like an eternity, the leader spoke again. Yara is our strongest warrior. She is the one who keeps our people safe. To give her up would be to weaken us. But I understand your desire. If you truly wish to take her, you must promise that she will be treated with respect. You must promise that she will never be harmed. Marcus nodded quickly. Of course. She will be treated like a queen. The leader's eyes narrowed as if measuring the truth of Marcus's words. Then it is done. Yara was brought before Marcus the next day. She was everything the stories had promised. Her skin was the color of rich, dark earth, her long hair black as midnight. Her eyes burned with an intensity that seemed to pierce through Marcus, as though she could see every secret he kept hidden. She stood tall, her posture proud and unyielding. She was beautiful, but there was something more. Something in the way she carried herself that made Marcus feel both awe and fear. Yara did not speak, but her gaze said everything. She understood that she was being taken away, that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. But in that moment, she chose to remain silent. She would not show fear. She would not show weakness. As Marcus led her away, he felt a strange mixture of triumph and uncertainty. He had achieved his goal, but something deep inside him whispered that this was not going to be as easy as he thought. He had purchased a woman, but what had he truly bought? And what would happen once they left the jungle behind? For now, he was satisfied. He had Yara. But little did he know, this purchase would set into motion a series of events that would change both their lives forever. Yara had never seen a place like the city. The noise, the bright lights, the rushing crowds, it was all overwhelming. The jungle, with its sounds of birds, the rustling of leaves, and the rhythm of the river, was peaceful to her. But here, the air felt heavy, and the buildings stretched endlessly into the sky, like giant concrete trees that blocked the sun. The city felt like a foreign world, and she was completely alone in it. Marcus had brought her to a mansion that stood tall in the middle of the city. The mansion was a stark contrast to the jungle hut she had known, with its shiny floors, expensive furniture, and walls full of paintings and decorations that she couldn't understand. She felt lost in this world, like a small animal trapped in a cage far from home. The moment they arrived, Yara was taken to a room that was much bigger than any space she'd ever known. It had large windows that looked out over the bustling city, but the view only reminded her of the distance between her old life and this new one. She was placed in the center of the room, standing tall and proud, her dark eyes scanning the space, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was the first sign of defiance, her first way of saying that she would not easily bend to this new life. Marcus, on the other hand, was thrilled. He couldn't stop smiling, proud of his new acquisition, as he called her. But his excitement was mixed with something else. He didn't know exactly how to treat her. He had bought her, but he didn't know how to deal with her now that she was in front of him. She wasn't like any of the women he had ever known. She wasn't interested in the riches he could offer, or the fancy clothes he gave her. He wanted her to be grateful, but she wasn't showing him that. In fact, she wasn't showing much of anything at all. At first, Marcus thought she was just shy, perhaps confused by the new surroundings. He tried to make her feel comfortable, giving her beautiful clothes and the best food. But nothing worked. Yara didn't react. She ate the food without any excitement, and she wore the clothes with indifference. She wasn't ungrateful, but she wasn't impressed either. She didn't care about riches. She cared about the jungle, about the world she had been taken from. Days passed, and Marcus began to feel a sense of frustration. Yara's silence was like a wall he couldn't break down. He tried to speak to her, to connect with her, but she rarely answered. The only time she spoke was when he asked her about the jungle or her people, and even then, she answered in a way that made it clear she had no intention of opening up to him. She wasn't going to be controlled, not by him or anyone. The mansion began to feel empty to Yara. She spent her days staring out the windows, thinking of the life she had lost. She missed the smell of the forest, the sound of the river, the sense of freedom that had once been hers. Here, she was trapped, surrounded by walls that kept her from the things she truly cared about. Marcus watched her from a distance, trying to understand what was going on in her mind. He had expected her to be grateful, even awed by the luxury he was offering her. But instead, she seemed distant, lost in her thoughts. There were moments when he saw a flicker of anger in her eyes, as if she was silently rebelling against the life he had forced upon her. But he didn't know how to handle that. He was used to people respecting him, not ignoring him. One afternoon, Marcus decided to try a different approach. He thought perhaps Yara needed a little more attention, a little more kindness. So he invited her to dinner with him, hoping that a pleasant evening might change things. They sat at a large, elegant dining table, the kind Yara had never seen before. The plates were made of fine porcelain, and the food was rich and extravagant, nothing like the simple meals she was used to in the jungle. Yet, as much as Marcus tried to make her feel comfortable, it was clear that she didn't care about the food. Her eyes kept drifting to the window, to the outside world. "You know," Marcus said, trying to make conversation, "you could get used to this life. There's so much here, so much more than what you had before. I can give you everything." Yara's gaze didn't move from the window. "I didn't ask for everything," she said quietly, her voice calm but firm. Marcus felt a little taken aback. He had expected her to be more grateful, or at least to show some kind of excitement. But she didn't. Instead, she just sat there, her face unreadable. "You're free now," he continued, trying a different approach. "You can have anything you want. You can live without fear, without hunger." But Yara shook her head slowly. "I was free before," she said softly, her voice carrying a deep sadness. "Free in the jungle, free in the wild." The words stung Marcus more than he expected. He had thought that bringing her here would be the greatest thing for her, that she would come to appreciate the comforts of civilization. But Yara wasn't impressed. She wasn't interested in being a part of his world. She longed for the freedom of her people, the life that had been taken from her. In the days that followed, Yara grew even more distant. She spent most of her time alone in her room, away from Marcus and his attempts to engage with her. It was clear that she had no interest in him, no interest in the life he had given her. To her, this was a prison, not a gift. And in her mind, Marcus was the jailer. One morning, after several days of silence, Marcus decided to confront her. He couldn't stand the distance any longer. He needed answers. He needed to understand why she wouldn't accept the life he had given her. He entered her room, his footsteps echoing in the quiet space. Yara was sitting by the window, staring out at the city, her back to him. For a moment, he just watched her, trying to read her. But when she didn't acknowledge his presence, he finally spoke. "Why don't you want this?" he asked, his voice frustrated but calm. "Why don't you want to be a part of this world?" Yara turned slowly to face him, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place. Something wild, something unbroken. "I don't belong here," she said, her voice steady. "I belong to the jungle. I belong to my people. You don't understand that." Marcus felt a wave of frustration rise within him. "But I've given you everything. I've given you a life of comfort, a life of safety. Why can't you see that?" Marcus felt a wave of frustration rise within him. "But I've given you everything. I've given you a life of comfort, a life of safety. Why can't you see that?" Yara stood up, her tall figure casting a shadow across the room. "Comfort? Safety?" She shook her head. "What you call comfort is nothing but a cage. What you call safety is just fear. I am not meant for this life. I am not meant to be locked away in a room, wearing fine clothes, eating food that doesn't taste real. This is not my world. For the first time, Marcus felt something he hadn't expected. Doubt. He had brought her here, and thought he could make her fit into his world. But Yara's words pierced through him like a dagger. He had only seen his own desires, his own ambition. He hadn't considered what she truly needed, what she truly wanted. She wasn't a possession to be owned. She was a woman with a spirit as wild and untamed as the jungle she came from. As the days went by, Marcus started to realize that controlling Yara was not going to be as easy as he thought. She was strong, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally, and she wasn't going to bend to his will. He had brought her to the city, thinking he could shape her into something she wasn't, but in the end, it was clear that it was him who was being changed. The city that had once seemed so full of promise now felt like a cage to both of them, and the walls between them seemed to grow higher with every passing day. Days turned into weeks, and life in the city didn't get any easier for Yara. The mansion felt more like a prison with each passing day, and the more she stayed in it, the more she missed the jungle, the calls of the birds, the whisper of the trees, the taste of fresh water from the river. The city was noisy and cold, a place where she didn't belong. But even though she felt lost and out of place, there was something inside her that refused to break. Yara had never been weak, not in spirit. She had always been strong, raised in the heart of the jungle to be a protector of her people. But the strength that had helped her survive in the wild was different here. Here, her strength was not enough to escape. The walls around her were high, and the world outside was unfamiliar. The only thing she could hold onto was her mind and her memories. But those memories were haunting her, growing louder with every passing day. They spoke of the past, of the ancient stories of her people, and of the power that flowed through her blood. There was something deep inside her, something she didn't fully understand, but it was awakening. She could feel it stirring like a sleeping animal that was slowly starting to wake up. Marcus, on the other hand, was starting to notice something strange about her. At first, he had thought Yara was just a wild woman who was unwilling to adjust to her new life. But over time, he began to see something else, something more powerful. She was changing, though he didn't know how or why. Her silence had become less about rebellion and more about something deeper. There were moments when Marcus would catch her staring out of the window, her eyes distant, as if she was seeing something far beyond the city. It was as if she was connected to something he couldn't understand, something beyond the walls of the mansion. He had heard rumors of the woman's power, of the strength of her tribe, but he never truly believed them. Now, as he watched her, he couldn't help but wonder if there was truth to those stories. One evening, Marcus found himself watching her again, from a distance, as she stood in the center of her room. The moonlight shone through the window, casting soft light across her face. She was still, like a statue, her eyes closed. For a moment, Marcus felt a strange chill run down his spine. There was something about the way she stood, the way she seemed to connect with the world around her, that unsettled him. Without thinking, he stepped into the room. Yara didn't react at first, but Marcus could feel the tension in the air. It was as if she was aware of him without needing to look. He cleared his throat. "Yara," he said softly, trying to get her attention. "What are you doing?" Yara slowly opened her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, she looked directly at him. There was no anger in her gaze, no defiance. But there was something else, something that made him feel small, as if she could see straight through him. "I'm listening," she said, her voice calm but full of depth. "Listening to the land, to the spirits." Marcus blinked. He didn't understand what she meant. The spirits. "Yara, this is the city. There are no spirits here." But Yara only shook her head, a small, knowing smile on her lips. "You think that the world of the city is the only world that exists," she said, her voice low, almost like a whisper. "But the jungle is alive. The spirits are everywhere. They speak to me." Marcus felt a chill run through him. He thought she was simply speaking in metaphors, or perhaps playing games with him. But the look in her eyes told him that she wasn't joking. She believed what she said, and that frightened him. "Spirits or not," Marcus said, trying to push past the unease growing in his chest. "You're here now. And here, we don't listen to the land. We focus on what's real." Yara said nothing in reply. Instead, she turned her back to him, walking toward the window once more. Marcus stood there, watching her, trying to make sense of what was happening. He didn't believe in spirits. He didn't believe in the supernatural. But he couldn't deny that something was changing within her, something that was hard to explain. The next morning, Marcus found himself in the study, buried in work as usual. But he couldn't stop thinking about Yara. There was something about her that intrigued him, something that he couldn't quite put his finger on. She wasn't like any woman he had ever known. She was strong, independent, and fearless. And despite the fact that she was living in his house, with all his wealth and comforts, she remained untouched by it all. It was as if she was living in two worlds at once, one foot in the present and one in the past. And it was that connection to the past that seemed to hold the key to who she really was. Marcus decided to ask her more about the jungle and her tribe. He wanted to understand where she came from, what made her so different. So, that evening, he approached her again, this time with a different tone. He wasn't trying to control her. He was genuinely curious. "Yara," he said gently, "tell me more about the jungle. About your people. I want to understand." Yara turned to face him, her expression still unreadable. "My people are the keepers of the jungle. We live in balance with nature. We protect it, and in return, it protects us." Marcus nodded, eager to hear more. "What do you mean, it protects you?" Yara's eyes seemed to glow in the soft light. "The jungle is alive. It speaks to us. We listen to its rhythms, its needs. We are part of it. We are one with the land." Marcus felt a strange tingling sensation at the back of his neck. He didn't believe in the supernatural, but there was something about the way Yara spoke that made him question his own beliefs. It was as if she truly believed in this connection, as if she had power, real power, that he didn't understand. As the days passed, Marcus began to notice other strange things happening around the mansion. The plants in the garden seemed to grow more quickly than before, twisting and turning as if reaching toward something. At night, he could hear faint whispers in the wind, like voices carried by the breeze. The strange occurrences made him uneasy, but he couldn't dismiss them. There was no logical explanation for what he was seeing and hearing. One night, when Marcus couldn't sleep, he wandered outside to the garden, hoping to clear his mind. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the plants. As he walked, he noticed something. Yara was standing at the edge of the garden, her arms raised as if in a trance. Her body was perfectly still, but her eyes were wide open, focused on something only she could see. "Yara?" Marcus called out softly. She turned to face him, and for the first time, he saw a different side of her, a side that was connected to something far greater than himself. "It's happening," she whispered. "The spirits are awake." Marcus took a step back, unsure of what to say. He had never believed in spirits or magic, but something about the way Yara spoke made him feel like he was standing on the edge of something ancient and powerful. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The curse," Yara said. "The curse that brought me here. It has begun." Marcus felt his heart race. He had heard Yara mention a curse before, but he had always dismissed it as superstition. Now, standing in the moonlight, he began to wonder if there was more truth to her words than he had ever imagined. "The jungle is calling," Yara said softly, her voice barely audible above the wind. "And soon it will reclaim what is its own." Yara had always been a mystery to him. Her silence, her calm, her connection to the jungle. It was all beyond his understanding. But now, with the whispers and the strange occurrences growing stronger, He couldn't help but wonder if she was part of something much bigger than he had originally realized. Her words, too, were becoming more cryptic, more intense. "The jungle is calling," she had said. "And soon, it will reclaim what is its own." What did that even mean? Marcus couldn't make sense of it, and the more he tried to understand, the more he felt like he was losing control of the situation. That evening, as Marcus sat alone in his study, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. The mansion, with all its luxury, felt suffocating. The air seemed thicker, heavier, and he could hear the wind whistling outside, as if it were trying to tell him something. He walked to the window and looked out over the city, the towering buildings in the distance. Everything seemed calm, but he knew deep inside that the peace was temporary. Suddenly, he was snapped out of his thoughts by a loud knock on the door. He turned to see one of the servants standing in the doorway, looking uneasy. "Sir," the servant said, "there's something you need to see." Marcus followed the servant through the halls of the mansion, his footsteps echoing in the silence. As they reached the back door, the servant pointed to the garden, where something was moving in the shadows. Marcus's heart began to race. It was Yara. She was standing in the center of the garden, her arms raised to the sky, her body swaying slightly, as if she were dancing to a rhythm only she could hear. The plants around her seemed to be alive, twisting and turning in unnatural ways, almost as if they were responding to her. The moonlight illuminated her form, casting a strange glow across the garden. It was like something out of a dream, something not of this world. "Yara," Marcus called, but his voice felt small against the overwhelming sense of mystery in the air. Yara didn't respond. She didn't even move. She seemed completely lost in her trance, her eyes closed, her face calm. It was as if she was in another place entirely. The wind picked up, swirling around her, and the plants in the garden seemed to grow faster, their vines reaching out toward her. It was both beautiful and terrifying to watch. "What is this?" Marcus whispered to himself, unable to look away. He felt a chill run down his spine. He had never seen anything like this before. Yara was changing, but not in the way he had expected. It wasn't just her resistance to his world. It was something deeper, something ancient. She wasn't just a wild woman from the jungle. She was something more. She was connected to the land in ways he couldn't understand. As the night wore on, Marcus stayed by the window, watching Yara in the garden. He could feel the air growing heavier, as if the atmosphere itself was changing. The plants, now almost fully grown, seemed to pulse with life, their leaves trembling in the moonlight. The garden looked like something out of a fairy tale, but it wasn't the kind of magic Marcus had ever known. Hours passed, and Yara finally lowered her arms. Her eyes slowly opened, and she turned toward the mansion. It was as if she knew Marcus had been watching her the whole time. Her gaze was steady, calm, but there was something in her eyes that made Marcus feel small, like a child caught in the middle of something he couldn't control. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked, his voice strained. Yara didn't answer right away. She simply looked at him, as if weighing her words carefully. Finally, she spoke. "The land is awakening," she said softly, her voice barely audible above the rustling of the leaves. "It has been asleep for too long." Marcus frowned. "The land? What are you talking about?" Yara stepped closer, her bare feet making no sound on the grass. She looked directly at him, her eyes piercing through him. "The jungle is not just a place," she said. "It is alive. It is ancient, and it will not stay asleep forever." Marcus felt a sense of dread creep over him. He had heard her talk about the jungle before, but this time it was different. There was an intensity in her words that sent a shiver down his spine. She wasn't just telling stories anymore. She was speaking as though she knew something he didn't, something dangerous. "What do you want me to do?" Marcus asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Yara didn't answer right away. She looked back toward the garden, where the plants were still swaying in the breeze. For a moment, she seemed lost in thought, as if she were listening to something only she could hear. Then, without warning, she turned back to Marcus and spoke again. "You cannot control this," she said. "No one can. It is bigger than all of us." Marcus swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. He had always prided himself on being in control of people, of situations, of his own life. But now, in the presence of Yura's calm, unwavering power, he felt like a child again. Small, helpless. Over the next few days, the changes around the mansion grew more pronounced. The garden, once neatly kept, was now wild and untamed, its plants growing out of control. The vines twisted around the fence, creeping into the house. The air felt thick, as if something was pressing down on the walls. Even the servants began to notice the strange atmosphere, whispering to each other in fear. At night, the sounds of the jungle seemed to bleed into the city. The rustling of leaves, the calls of animals, the faintest hum of life. It was all there, as if the jungle itself was trying to reclaim the land it had once ruled. Marcus, unable to sleep, would lie awake at night, listening to the sounds, wondering if he had made a mistake by bringing Yara here. He had thought he was buying a woman, but now it seemed like he had brought something far more powerful into his home. He had no idea how to stop it, or if he even could. One morning, as he walked through the garden, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The plants, those same plants that had once been neatly arranged, were now completely overgrown. Vines hung from the trees like thick ropes, and the flowers had bloomed into bright, unnatural colors. It was as though the jungle had come to life right outside his door. Yara appeared at his side, as if she had been waiting for him. "You see it now, don't you?" she asked softly, her eyes dark and knowing. Marcus nodded, unable to speak. The garden, the house, it was all changing, and he was powerless to stop it. "The jungle is waking," Yara said again. "It is reclaiming what is its own." Marcus wanted to argue. He wanted to shout that he didn't believe in any of this nonsense. But as he stood there, surrounded by the overgrown garden, he couldn't deny that something was happening, something that was beyond his control. "You can't stop it," Yara said, her voice full of quiet certainty. "The jungle never forgets. It always remembers." And just like that, Marcus realized the truth. This was no longer about power, money, or control. This was about something far bigger. The jungle was alive, and it was coming for everything he had built. The changes had only just begun, and he wasn't ready for what would come next. Marcus had never felt so lost in his entire life. Every day that passed in the mansion felt more like a dream he couldn't escape from. He had always been in control of his life, of his world, but now everything seemed to be slipping away, like sand running through his fingers. Yara's presence had changed everything. Her strange connection to the jungle, her power, her calmness in the face of all that was unfamiliar. It was like she was slowly taking over his world. And the worst part was, he wasn't sure he wanted to stop it. The mansion itself was beginning to reflect the changes that were happening inside of him. The garden, once meticulously designed, had become wild, the plants growing faster and stronger every day. The vines crept along the walls, twisting and turning in patterns Marcus didn't understand. The once beautiful flower beds now seemed to have a life of their own, their colors too vibrant, their shapes too strange. Marcus had tried to ignore it, tried to tell himself that it was just the power of his imagination, that he had to focus on what was real. But every time he walked through the garden or saw the strange glow in Yora's eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that something more was going on, something that was bigger than either of them. And Yara, she wasn't helping. Every time he spoke to her, she seemed to speak in riddles, her words more cryptic and strange. She would tell him that the jungle was alive, that it was awakening, that it was calling to her. But what did it all mean? Why had the jungle come to this city? Why had it chosen her? One night, Marcus could no longer take it. He was standing in the garden, his eyes fixed on Yara, who was once again standing in the center of the plants, her arms raised to the sky. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the world was holding its breath. The garden was alive around her, the plants moving in ways they shouldn't, and Marcus could hear a faint hum, as if the earth itself was vibrating. "Yara," Marcus called, his voice cutting through the strange silence of the night. "What is happening? What do you want from me?" Yara didn't turn to face him. She didn't even flinch. Her eyes were closed, her face serene. But when she spoke, her voice was different. It was softer, almost otherworldly. "It's not about what I want, Marcus. It's about what the jungle needs." Marcus took a step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "The jungle. The jungle doesn't belong here. This is my world, not yours." Yara's eyes opened, and she looked at him then. There was no anger in her gaze, only quiet understanding. "This world was never yours to begin with. The jungle has always been here, underneath everything. You just didn't see it." Marcus's anger flared. "This is ridiculous. You're just a woman from a tribe. This isn't some magical fairy tale. The jungle doesn't own this city." Yara's expression remained calm, but there was something in her eyes that made him falter. "You think you can control everything, Marcus, but the jungle doesn't need you to control it. It just needs you to let it be." Marcus was frustrated, his mind spinning. He had never been one to believe in anything mystical or supernatural. He had always dealt with facts, with logic. But Yara was testing him, challenging everything he thought he knew. "Let it be. What are you saying? You can't just let plants and trees take over the city," he shouted, his voice rising. "I bought you. I own you. You are supposed to follow my rules, not make your own." Yara's gaze hardened. She stepped toward him, her movements slow and graceful, like a predator closing in on its prey. "You may have bought my body, Marcus," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper, "but you cannot buy my soul. And you cannot own the land. It will never belong to you." Her words stung more than he expected, cutting through him in a way he couldn't explain. He felt his control slipping away, the power he had always wielded over his world feeling like it was no longer his to command. Yara was right. In this moment, he wasn't in control. Not of her, not of the mansion, not even of his own feelings. "I want you to stop," Marcus said, his voice low, his tone firm. "Stop with all this talk of spirits, of the jungle, of this rebellion. You need to stop it." Yara's eyes glinted, her lips curling into a faint smile. "You want me to stop, Marcus? You don't even know what you're asking. The jungle doesn't stop. It doesn't wait. It's always there, waiting for the right moment." Marcus's mind raced. He had thought he could handle this situation, that he could bend Yara to his will. But it was clear now that he had underestimated her, and underestimated the power she carried within her. The jungle wasn't just something physical, something he could control with money or force. It was alive, and it was tied to Yara in ways he couldn't possibly understand. "Why did you come here, Yara?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with frustration and confusion. "Why did you come to this city? Why did you let me bring you here if this is what you wanted?" Yara's gaze softened, and she took a step back, her eyes distant. "I didn't come here for you, Marcus. I didn't come for the city. I came because the jungle called me. It has always been calling me. And when I entered this place, it was not just the city I stepped into. I stepped into a story, one that has been unfolding for generations." Marcus stared at her, unsure of what she meant. "A story? What story?" Yara didn't answer immediately. She stood still, as though she were listening to something far away. Her voice was quiet when she spoke again. "The story of the jungle's awakening. It has been dormant for centuries, waiting for the right moment. And now, that moment has arrived." Marcus felt a chill run through him. He had heard of ancient legends of the jungle, of people who claimed the land was alive, of spirits who controlled the earth. But he had always dismissed them as myths, stories told by old women in the village, passed down through the generations. He never believed them. But now, standing in front of Yara, he wasn't so sure. There was something in her eyes, something in the way she spoke, that made him feel like she was telling the truth. The ground beneath them seemed to shift slightly, as if responding to her words. Marcus could feel it under his feet, something powerful, something deep in the earth, stirring. He stepped back, his heart racing. What was happening? "You don't understand, Marcus," Yara said, her voice filled with a quiet intensity. "The jungle doesn't just belong to my people. It belongs to the earth. And the earth is waking up. The plants, the trees, the animals, they are all part of it. They are all part of me." Marcus was no longer sure what to believe. Was Yara the one who was changing? Or was it the world around them that was shifting? Had he brought something far greater into his life than he ever imagined? Before he could speak, Yara stepped toward him, her eyes fixed on his. "You may have thought you bought me, Marcus, but you were wrong. You can never control me, and you can never control the jungle. It will always fight back." For the first time, Marcus truly felt the weight of her words. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about something ancient, something powerful, and something that was now beginning to reveal itself. "I don't know what to do anymore," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. "Everything is changing, and I can't stop it." Yara smiled then, a smile that was both sad and knowing. "You can't stop it, Marcus. You can only watch. The jungle has awakened. And now, the world will never be the same." The mansion was quiet. The silence had become deafening. Marcus stood alone in the large, empty room, his mind racing. The events of the past few weeks had turned his life upside down. Yara had opened his eyes to a world he never thought possible. A world where nature, the jungle, was alive, more powerful than anything he had ever known. And now, everything was different. He had thought that by bringing Yara into his life, he would be in control. He thought he could mold her, shape her into what he wanted her to be. But instead, she had changed him. She had forced him to see things in a way that was beyond his understanding. And now, the jungle was beginning to take over, its presence felt in every corner of his life. The garden had grown wild, its plants twisting and turning in unnatural ways. The vines had crept into the mansion, climbing the walls and twisting through the windows. The flowers bloomed in strange, vibrant colors that seemed to pulse with life, almost as if they were breathing. Marcus couldn't remember the last time he had seen the place as it once was, neat, orderly, calm. Now it was a place of chaos, and he was trapped in it. But what scared him more than the wildness of the garden was what was happening inside of him. Yara had awakened something in him, something deep and primal. He had always thought of himself as a man of reason, of logic, someone who could control everything around him. But now he was questioning everything he had ever believed. The jungle had a power that he couldn't explain, and Yara was its link. She was connected to it in a way that was beyond comprehension. In the days that followed, Marcus became more withdrawn. He spent less time in the mansion, avoiding the garden, avoiding Yara. Every time he saw her, she seemed more distant, more at peace with the changes that were unfolding. She no longer looked like the wild woman he had brought from the jungle. She had become something more, something ancient, and it terrified him. Yara had stopped speaking in riddles, and instead, she would simply gaze out at the garden, her expression calm, as though she was waiting for something. Marcus didn't know what she was waiting for, but he knew it wasn't good. The jungle had a mind of its own, and it was awakening in ways that he couldn't control. One evening, as the sun set and the moon began to rise, Marcus found himself standing at the edge of the garden once more. The air was thick with the scent of flowers, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. The garden was more alive than ever, the plants reaching out toward the mansion like fingers, as if trying to pull the house into the earth. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also unsettling. The jungle was reclaiming the land, and Marcus felt like an intruder in his own home. He could hear footsteps behind him, and turned to see Yara approaching. She was as calm as ever, her bare feet silent on the grass. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, Marcus saw something different in them. It was not the wildness or defiance he had come to expect. It was peace, a deep, knowing peace. "You know what is happening, don't you?" she said softly, her voice a whisper in the stillness of the night. Marcus swallowed hard. "I don't know what's happening anymore. I don't know what I'm supposed to do." Yara stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "There is nothing you can do, Marcus. The jungle is waking, and there is no stopping it. The earth is calling. It has always called to me. And now it calls to you." He shook his head, his mind struggling to grasp the truth of her words. "I don't understand. Why me? Why now?" Yara smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone trying to comfort him. It was the smile of someone who understood something he didn't. "You brought me here. You brought the jungle with me. It's not just my destiny to walk this path, Marcus. It's yours too. You may have thought you controlled everything, but you were never in control. The jungle has always been a part of you too." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. Her words were like a punch to the gut, and yet there was something undeniable about them. Deep down, he knew she was right. There was a part of him that had always felt the pull of the earth, a part of him that had always been connected to something bigger than himself. But he had never listened. He had buried it beneath his ambition, beneath his need for control. And now, it was too late. "You think you've lost everything," Yara continued, her voice soft but firm. "But you haven't. What you've lost is the illusion of control, and what you've gained is something far more powerful. You have a choice, Marcus. You can fight it, or you can embrace it." Marcus stared at her, his thoughts a whirlwind. Everything in his life had led him to this moment. He had spent his life building an empire, convincing himself that he could control everything. He had wanted Yara for her beauty, her mystery, but he had never imagined that she would be the one to unravel his world. "Embrace it," he repeated, as if the idea was foreign to him. "What does that even mean?" Yara's gaze softened, and for the first time, Marcus saw a glimpse of the woman he had first encountered, the woman who had been wild and free, full of mystery and strength. "It means accepting the truth," she said simply. "It means letting go of the need to control everything, and trusting in something greater. The jungle is not just a place, it's a force, and now, it's part of you." For a long moment, Marcus didn't speak. He simply stared at her, his mind racing. Could he really let go of everything he had worked for? Could he truly embrace something as wild and untenable as the jungle? It wasn't just a physical place. It was a force of nature, alive and powerful, and it was part of him now. Could he accept that? Could he accept that he was part of something much bigger than himself? As the night air grew cooler, the moonlight bathed the garden in a soft glow, casting long shadows across the twisting vines and towering plants. Marcus felt a shift inside him, a feeling he couldn't explain. It was as if the earth itself was speaking to him, urging him to listen, to trust, to finally accept what he had been fighting all along. "I'm afraid," he said softly, the words escaping before he could stop them. Yara didn't answer right away. She simply watched him, her expression understanding. Then she took a step closer and placed her hand on his arm. The touch was gentle, but it carried a weight that seemed to ground him. "There's nothing to fear," she said. "The jungle will guide you. You don't have to fight it anymore. You just have to listen." Marcus looked down at her hand, then back at the garden, his heart heavy with uncertainty. The jungle, the earth, it was all a part of him now. He couldn't deny it. But could he really change? Could he truly let go of the need for control? For the first time in his life, Marcus realized that he didn't have all the answers. He didn't have to be the one in charge, the one making the decisions. He could let the earth take the lead. He could embrace the jungle, not as something to be controlled, but as something to be part of. With a deep breath, Marcus nodded. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid. The jungle was calling, and he was ready to listen. "I'm ready," he said, his voice quiet but steady. Yara smiled, and in that moment, Marcus knew that a new beginning was not only possible, it had already begun.